Episode 2, Defending the Mannis, an analysis of Stannis Baratheon of A Game of Thrones. Warning, there be spoilers and speculations here. When Game of Thrones discussions come up, as they inevitably do with it being the best television show out there, the question is often asked, who is your favorite character? Most people say Tyrion Lannister, or Jon Snow, or maybe Daenerys. Some people might say they liked Ned Stark or Robb Stark. When I say Stannis, the response is usually, who? At least before Season 5 it was. Or, wait a minute. The guy who burned his daughter? Now I'll admit that after Season 5 it's much harder to defend that position, and I usually have to resort by pleading, book Stannis, the show butchered the character. That being said, I do think it's possible to make a case for the Mannis, and that's what I'm going to try to do in this episode, explaining why Stannis is the rightful king, why he should be a fan favorite, what the show got right and wrong about the character, and why some fans were extremely upset after Season 5. Stannis is not in Season 1, but we hear his name a few times. Ned Stark tells Littlefinger that King Robert has no trueborn sons, so when Robert dies, the throne is passed to his brother, Lord Stannis. When Littlefinger suggests that this will lead to war, Ned tells him that Stannis is the rightful heir, and nothing can change that. So right there we know that Ned recognizes Stannis as the rightful king, and it's because Stannis is the rightful king, by all the laws in Westeros. I've argued with a few people who think that Dany has a better claim, but that's simply not the case. Ned was aware of Dany's existence, yet he still knew that Stannis was king. Ned helped to overthrow Dany's family. Anyone who thinks Dany is the rightful ruler of Westeros must also think that Queen Elizabeth II should be Queen of America. But of course nobody thinks that, because there was a revolution and the English were thrown out of America. Same thing in Game of Thrones. There was a revolution and the Targaryens were kicked out of Westeros. The reason Stannis is not in Season 1 or Book 1 is because prior to those events, he took off from King's Landing to his home in Dragonstone. He had been a member of the Small Council when his brother was king, but he was suspicious of the Lannisters and thought, correctly, that Joffrey was a product of incest between Cersei and Jaime. It's unclear exactly how he knew this, but it suggested that Littlefinger, or someone he employed, might have whispered it in Stannis' ear. It's likely that Littlefinger planted the seed in Stannis' mind to further his own endgame. Stannis, who had a not-so-loving relationship with King Robert, decided to tell Jon Arryn, the Hand of the King, rather than King Robert himself, because he suspected that Robert would take Arryn more seriously. Stannis and Jon proceeded to investigate the same way that we saw Ned later do in the television series, by visiting brothels and whatever other detective work was an option in the Game of Thrones universe. As they were uncovering the truth, Jon Arryn died from poison. When King Robert asked Ned Stark, rather than Stannis, to be the Hand of the King, Stannis took the opportunity to flee from King's Landing. So yeah, Stannis pretty much started the whole Game of Thrones. Or more accurately, Littlefinger probably started the whole thing via Stannis. It's unclear when and how Stannis met Melisandre, but it was sometime after he left King's Landing and was brooding on Dragonstone. It appears that his wife, Selyse, converted to the Lord of Light and was the one to introduce the two. Okay, so now that we've established that Stannis is the rightful king and the person who set into motion the whole story, so let's explore what makes him the Mannis. Stannis' most obvious quality is that he's a bitter, angry, moody son of a bitch. At one point, his maester even comments that sometimes at night he imagines he can hear Stannis grinding his teeth through the castle. So what's he so angry about? Let's comment that he was always sullen, even as a child. In the books, there's a fool named Patchface who lives with Stannis and company. When describing Patchface in a letter, Stannis' father says, "We have found the most splendid fool. Robert will be delighted with him, and perhaps in time he'll even teach Stannis how to laugh." Unfortunately, on the voyage home after writing that letter, both the Baratheon parents are killed in a shipwreck, witnessed by Stannis and Robert, who had been excitedly watching their parents' ships sailing home. Stannis was just a boy at the time, but he abandoned the Seven and decided to become an atheist that day. Another possible reason that he's always been so pissy is because he lived in his brother's shadow all of his life. At one point it is said, "Whatever he did, Robert had done first, and better." Robert was charming, good-looking, and a great warrior. He was the famous rebel who overthrew the Mad King and killed Rhaegar Targaryen. Robert was also kind of an asshole to Stannis. For example, on Stannis' wedding night, Robert deflowered one of Selyse's cousins in the bed that was made up for the newlyweds, conceiving a bastard son. During Robert's rebellion, Stannis was ordered by Robert to hold their family castle, Storm's End, when Robert went off to war. Storm's End was put under siege for the better part of a year, but Stannis held it as ordered. After eating all the horses, cats, and dogs, Stannis, Selyse, and everyone else in the castle were on the brink of starvation when Davos smuggled enough food to get them through the siege. Eventually, Ned Stark arrived with reinforcements and the siege was lifted. After the siege and the success of Robert's rebellion, King Robert ordered Stannis to oversee the building of a new royal fleet. Robert then ordered Stannis to take his fleet to Dragonstone to kill off the remaining Targaryen children, Viserys and Daenerys. However, by the time Stannis arrived, the Targaryens were gone. King Robert was pissed at Stannis and considered this a failure, so gave their family castle not to Stannis, but to their younger brother Renly. That's why Stannis resides on Dragonstone rather than their family castle of Storm's End. After that, Stannis served his brother loyally for 15 years as master of ships on the small council. When Jon Arryn died unexpectedly, Robert once again slights his brother by asking Ned Stark to be the new hand of the king. As Stannis describes it, I sat on the council for 15 years, helping Jon Arryn rule the realm while Robert drank and whored. But when Jon died, did my brother name me his hand? No, he went galloping off to his dear friend Ned Stark and offered him the honor. So, Stannis has never been acknowledged for his accomplishments or given the respect he thinks he's due. There's also clearly some little brother syndrome going on here. When King Robert dies and it's revealed that he has no true-born children, Stannis, now the rightful king, is rejected by virtually everyone in Westeros, including his younger brother. Aside from the few people who are with Stannis on Dragonstone, pretty much only Ned Stark acknowledges that Stannis is the rightful king. And Ned loses his head for it. So there's some of the reason that Stannis is so moody. I think an argument can be made that Stannis isn't just an angry person, but also a sensitive one. Consider this story that he tells Davos, explaining part of the reason that he became a follower of R'hllor, the Lord of Light. He says, "When I was a lad, I found an injured goshawk and nursed her back to health. Proudwing, I named her. She would perch on my shoulder and flutter from room to room after me and take food from my hand, but she would never soar. Time and again I would take her hawking, but she never flew higher than the treetops. Robert called her Weak Wing. He owned a gray falcon named Thunderclap who never missed her strike. One day our great-uncle, Sir Herbert, told me to try a different bird. I was making a fool of myself with Proudwing, he said, and he was right. The seven have never brought me so much as a sparrow. It's time I tried another hawk, Davos, a red hawk." So there's some of the reasons he's so moody. Things have never come easy to him. He has a natural disposition towards sadness and bitterness, little brother syndrome, and he's never been given any respect that he thinks he's due. Plus, add in the fact that he's in a loveless marriage with a whack job, and his only daughter has grayscale. Aside from a little sympathy, though, that's no reason to really like him. So why am I a fan? Well, aside from being cranky, his next most prominent quality is that he's a badass. Not in a Robert Baratheon or Khal Drogo kind of way, where he's obviously the toughest dude in town, but in a never-say-die kind of way. If you had to bet on one character to be able to walk through the gates of hell and make it to the other side due to willpower alone, Stannis would easily be the odds-on favorite. In the first book, in a Ned point of view chapter, it says, "Ned found it hard to imagine what could frighten Stannis Baratheon." During the War of Five Kings, Tywin Lannister gives us two quotes about Stannis. The first one is, "I felt from the beginning that Stannis was the greater danger than all the others combined." And the second one is, "This is Stannis Baratheon. The man will fight to the bitter end and then some." He's also famously described as pure iron, and that he'll break before he bends. At the end of A Dance with Dragons, Asha Greyjoy, Theon's sister, named Yara in the show, sees Stannis. The passage says, "His eyes were sunk deep in pits, his close-cropped beard no more than a shadow across his hollow cheeks and bony jawbone. Yet there was power in his stare, an iron ferocity that told Asha this man would never, ever turn back from his course." This iron will in fictional characters is something that appeals to me. That Stannis possesses this iron will is what was so maddening about him burning his daughter in Season 5. It's not that it's impossible he would ever do such a thing. Indeed, to not waver from such a decision is part of that iron will. But that he did it so easily. He can and has suffered excruciating hardships. The show should have taken more time to show the desperation in his camp to convince us. Don't even get me started on Ramsay's 20 good men. I'll talk more about the burning later. Also, Stannis is very righteous. Varys even says, "There's nothing so terrifying as a truly righteous man," in his description of Stannis. He does things because he believes they're the right thing to do. However, I wouldn't go so far as to call him a good guy. What I mean is, to Stannis, doing your duty, be it sacrifice or loyalty, or even something else that might cause collateral damage, is all part of doing the right thing. For example, when Robert ordered Stannis to kill Viserys and Daenerys when they were just children, Stannis was ready and willing to follow orders, because being loyal to your king and your brother is the right way to be. Contrast this with Ned Stark, who resigned as Hand of the King when he was informed that Robert had sent assassins after Daenerys. Stannis has a very utilitarian code of ethics. He'll consider almost any act if the ends justify the means. Since Melisandre has him convinced that it is he and he alone that can save the world from the White Walkers, there's almost no means that can't be justified by the ends. This iron will and accompanying reputation tends to confuse a lot of people, though. It does not mean that he's too stubborn to change his mind or listen to counsel. In fact, Stannis is one of the most pragmatic characters in the series. This is why he's actually one of, if not the best candidate, fighting for the Iron Throne, and one of, if not the best military commanders in the series. Before exploring what the show got right and wrong, I'll just quickly mention some of his military feats. 1. As already mentioned, he held Storm's End for a year during Robert's Rebellion and was willing to die rather than surrender. What's impressive about this is that he was only about 18 years old at the time. 2. This next one probably only book readers will know, but after Robert became king, the Ironborn under the leadership of Balon Greyjoy revolted and destroyed the Lannister fleet. The Ironborn are a seafaring warrior culture, and Victarion Greyjoy is perhaps the best naval commander in the whole series. Except that during the rebellion, Victarion and his fleet were smashed by Stannis at sea. This is really an amazing feather in Stannis' military cap. 3. Even though he lost the Battle of Blackwater, it was only because the fortunate timing of Tywin and the Tyrells. King's Landing had never fallen, and despite the wildfire destroying his fleet, Stannis was going to win the battle. 4. He defeated the wildlings at the Wall. It all happened so fast in the show that I think it was a little underappreciated by fans. In the books, it goes further into the tactics he used, and it shows that he was not only up against 100,000 wildlings, but their giants as well. Also, he did it without a loan from the Iron Bank. That was a show-only thing that I'll talk about later. 5. In another battle left out of the show, he defeated the Ironborn yet again. This time it's Yara/Asha Greyjoy and her men defeated on land as Stannis fights to liberate the North. 6. In the show, Stannis is easily defeated by the Boltons and his men abandon him. I'm convinced this will not happen in the books, and I'll explain why later. Alright, so, the show did an amazing job of adapting Stannis in Season 2. Stephen Delane is an awesome actor. I think he and Charles Dance as Tywin Lannister deliver the best performances on the show. Stannis' personality is perfectly summed up in the scene where he's dictating his letter declaring himself king. When he insists that it's a lie to call Robert his beloved brother, and that Jaime Lannister should be called Sir Jaime Lannister the Kingslayer, his no-nonsense, cranky attitude is really on display. Stannis is almost immediately painted as a villain when he has his shadow baby kill his brother. I'll admit that was pretty messed up. But when you watch that scene of Stannis and Renly meeting to discuss terms, Stannis says, "For the sake of the mother who bore us, I will give you this one night to reconsider. Come to me before dawn, and I will grant you your old seat on the council. I'll even name you my heir. Otherwise, I shall destroy you." Both Stannis' determination and his pragmatism are on display here. Honestly, after reading the books and rewatching that scene, Renly should have known better. Stannis is not a guy who makes idle threats. His offer was perfectly reasonable. Renly is usually seen as the victim here, but Stannis gave him fair warning. Can the use of a shadow baby be justified? If you're a utilitarian with no other options, like Stannis, then yes, absolutely. Think about this. Imagine instead of Melisandre and the Lord of Light and a shadow baby, it was Jaqen H'ghar and the Many-Faced God. If Stannis had sent Jaqen to assassinate his brother, I don't think most fans would have a problem with it. The fact that it was a shadow monster is what bothers people. And it is a little different, but really it's not. You gotta use what you got. Stannis had a shadow monster, he did not have Jaqen H'ghar. In the final episode of Season 2, Stannis does show some remorse over killing Renly. But it's basically just him saying, "I killed my brother." Contrast this with the books, where he tells the story of Renly's peach. The story goes like this. Renly offered me a peach at our parley. Mocked me, defied me, threatened me, and offered me a peach. I thought he was drawing a blade and went for mine own. Was that his purpose, to make me show fear, or was it one of his pointless jests? When he spoke of how sweet the peach was, did his words have some hidden meaning? Only Renly could vex me with a piece of fruit. He brought his doom upon himself with his treason. But I did love him, Davos. I know that now. I swear I will go to my grave thinking of my brother's peach. And then later to Melisandre he says, Renly and his peach. In my dreams I see the juice running from his mouth, the blood from his throat. If he had done his duty by his brother, we would have smashed Lord Tywin, a victory even Robert could be proud of. The other big scene in Season 2 is, of course, the Battle of Blackwater. Stannis names Davos his hand on the way to the battle. This is a really big deal in that Davos is low-born. He's not a lord, and no other king in the whole series would consider elevating a former smuggler with no titles to the second highest position in the realm. This is Stannis' sense of fairness on display. For someone who has only watched the show, it might be hard to understand why someone like Davos would serve someone like Stannis. This is one of the reasons. His sense of justice isn't just punishing bad deeds, but rewarding good ones and judging people on merit. The show does a good job of capturing how badass Stannis is during the battle as he leads the charge immediately after his fleet is destroyed by wildfire. In the books, it's a little different. In the books, he stays back and coordinates the battle from the sea. Leading the charge is actually not something Stannis would do. It's more of a Robert Baratheon thing. But it was an effective way for the show to capture how relentless he can be. As he's preparing to lead the charge, one of his men is pleading with him that hundreds will die. Stannis shrugs his shoulders and simply says, thousands. Tyrion sees the charge and comments, he's a serious man, Stannis Baratheon. After 5 seasons, I still think the Battle of Blackwater, Season 2, Episode 9, is the best episode in the whole series. At the end of Season 2, Stannis and Melisandre see a great battle in the snow. This, along with another vision by Daenerys, makes me think that book Stannis' fate will be much, much different than show Stannis, who's presumably dead at the end of Season 5. Alright, so Season 2 I think was a great portrayal of Stannis and I have no complaints. Not a whole lot happens in Season 3. We meet Shireen and we see that Stannis cares about her. Gendry is brought to Dragonstone and Stannis' utilitarianism is again on display as he contemplates sacrificing him for the greater good. One good part here that I think is overlooked is Stannis explaining his reasoning to Davos. There's lots of good nuggets in this scene from Episode 8 of Season 3. Stannis says he must sacrifice Gendry to prevent the long night that never ends. He didn't ask for this responsibility, he says, nor did he ask to be king. This is a huge aspect of Stannis that many show watchers miss but book readers should understand. Stannis doesn't want to be the king, he is the king. As such, it's his duty to protect the realm and take the Iron Throne. Show watchers, and sometimes it appears the showrunners, think Stannis does everything he does because he's ambitious. This is simply not the case. Everything he does is because he thinks it's his duty and that he has an obligation to do it. During this exchange, Davos says that Stannis isn't the kind of person who sacrifices innocent people, and that he knows Davos will advise him not to sacrifice Gendry. As mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, Stannis became an atheist when he saw his parents die. During the scene, Stannis explains to Davos that he was never a believer, but he saw a vision in the flames of a great battle in the snow. And how can he deny Melisandre's power when he can see it right in front of him? I'll come back to this when we see how Season 4 started flying off the handle for Stannis fans. Anyway, this scene plants the seeds for Stannis' eventual burning of Shireen, but shows just how inconsistent the showrunners can be. More about that later. There's pretty much only 2 other important scenes for Stannis and company in Season 3. The first one is the burning of the leeches scene, which just leaves people scratching their heads about Melisandre and King's Blood power, especially when we see how utterly powerless King's Blood is during Season 5. One part that annoyed me about this scene was when Melisandre seduces Gendry and starts having sex with him for no apparent reason. Then Stannis walks in, apparently having known the plan. I guess it was just another excuse for the show to show Melisandre's boobies. The other important scene is when Davos reads the letter from the Night's Watch requesting help. In the show, Melisandre says that the War of 5 Kings means nothing and the real war is at the Wall. In the books, it's a little bit different. In the books, this is a big aha moment for Stannis. He later describes it to Jon Snow. He says, Lord Seaworth is a man of humble birth, but he reminded me of my duty when all I could think of was my rights. I had the cart before the horse, Davos said. I was trying to win the throne to save the kingdom, when I should have been trying to save the kingdom to win the throne. Basically, at this point, Stannis realizes that as king, it's not that important for him to sit the Iron Throne. What's important is for him to protect the realm. In the show, they just kind of make it look like he's just doing whatever Melisandre says. There's a big difference between book Stannis and show Stannis. Book Stannis is much more his own man, with much more self-determinism. In the show, he just kind of seems like Melisandre's puppet. All in all, though, I thought that Season 3 was pretty good for Stannis and fairly consistent with the books. I wish they had just not showed him again until he saved the Night's Watch. However, the showrunners didn't want us to completely forget about him, so they give us pointless screen time that just butchers the character. Early in Season 4, we see Melisandre burning Stannis' brother-in-law, Axel Florent, and a few others as they beg for mercy. Stannis is standing by during the ceremony, and when it's done, Davos approaches him and tells him that Axel was a loyal bannerman. Stannis responds, He was an infidel, and I told him to tear down his idols, and he disobeyed. At this point, my blood pressure spiked. I've heard rumors for years, but haven't found the source, that the showrunners claim they don't like Stannis as a character. This was the first time I knew they were going to butcher his story. In the book, Stannis and Melisandre do burn Florent, but it wasn't for being an infidel. It was for trying to make a deal behind Stannis' back that would marry off his daughter to Tommen. Stannis has him burned for treason, not for being an infidel. Later, we get Stannis worrying about being just a page in a history book, and he eventually sails to Braavos to get a loan from the Iron Bank. He then hires a bunch of mercenaries and saves the Night's Watch and the Wall from the wildlings. This really bothered me as well because Stannis is no beggar king. In the books, he does not go to the Iron Bank. He defeats Mance Rayder and the wildlings with what's left of his own army. That's what makes the victory so impressive. It's that his force was very small and consisted only of his loyal men. In the books, the Iron Bank goes to Stannis and offers him support because they can see he's a good investment, and it happens well after his victory at the Wall, and is part of the reason I think Book Stannis will actually defeat the Boltons, even though he lost the battle in the show. More about that later. I had high hopes for Season 5 and thought Stannis would finally be vindicated and become the fan favorite he is amongst the loyal, vocal minority of book readers. It started out decent enough, with Stannis vowing to dispose of the Boltons and once again putting his pragmatism on display as he offers to pardon the wildlings and make them citizens of the realm and give them their own land if they'll fight for him against the Boltons, and if Mance, the king beyond the wall, will kneel before him. There can only be one king in Westeros, he explains. This is more than a fair offer, but of course Mance is too proud to accept it, and Stannis once again looks like a bad guy for executing him, even though it was clearly Mance's pride that was his downfall. When Jon puts an arrow through Mance to spare him the suffering of burning, how does Stannis respond to this defiance? He offers to legitimize Jon into a Stark, and says it was brave of Jon to defy him, and that he values bravery. He wants to give Winterfell to Jon after he takes it from the Boltons. This is literally a dream come true for Jon, but again, Stannis' fairness and pragmatic approach is shunned as Jon refuses. I wish the show showed a little more of what a difficult choice it was for Jon. But, they want the big hero to stay true to his vows as the Night's Watchman. 2 scenes early in Season 5 told me it was all going to go to hell. The first is when Brienne tells Sansa that she saw a shadow with the face of Stannis Baratheon kill Renly. At that point, I turned to my wife and said they had better not be setting up a Brienne kills Stannis storyline. It's bad enough that she took out the Hound, which doesn't happen in the books. Now she's going to take out the king who cared? The next scene was when Stannis insists that Melisandre and Shireen accompany him on his march to Winterfell. In the books, Stannis leaves those two at the Wall, knowing that his family will be safer there. The final hint that it was all going to end in disaster was that great scene between Stannis and Shireen, where he tells her how she got grayscale and how hard he worked to save her. That touching scene could only foreshadow tragedy. On a side note, in the books, Stannis is actually pretty funny and has a very dry sense of humor, delivering jokes and insults in such a deadpan kind of way that most people aren't sure if he's joking or not. His insults are certainly the best of all the insults in the books. Show Stannis is lacking this character trait, but they did throw in some grammar Nazi stuff to make up for it, at least a little bit. Anyway, so in Book 5, like the show, Stannis and his army march for Winterfell, but unlike the show, none of his family, nor Davos or Melisandre, nor any mercenaries are with him. En route to Winterfell, Stannis meets with the Northern Mountain clans, following Jon's advice, and persuades them to join him in his quest to defeat the Boltons. He also goes to a place called Deepwood Motte, which is a northern castle that has been captured by Theon's sister, Asha/Yara, and her army of Ironborn. He defeats the Ironborn and takes Asha captive and brings more Northerners to his cause. As he marches toward Winterfell, the snow gets worse and worse until his army is slowed to a crawl. This situation is very bad, as horses are freezing to death and the soldiers are resorting to eating them. It's the siege of Storm's End all over again. He's even informed that soldiers in his army are requesting that people be burned alive as sacrifices to the Red God to get them through the snowstorm. To which Stannis responds, "I will have no burnings. Pray harder." This situation is incredibly different from the show. At the end of Book 5 and in the preview chapter for Book 6, Stannis' army finds a village outside Winterfell and sets up camp there. This is when the Iron Bank comes to him to offer financial support. Meanwhile, inside Winterfell in the books, the Boltons are with the Freys and the Manderleys. Remember, the Boltons and the Freys are the ones responsible for the Red Wedding. Tension is high as Stannis' army is approaching. The Manderleys are true Northmen and despise the Boltons. In fact, the reason Davos is not with Stannis at this point is because Davos met with Wyman Manderley on Stannis' behalf. Manderley promised to aid Stannis if Davos would go on a mission for him, so Stannis has allies in Winterfell who are pretending to be allied with the Boltons. As tension increases and the stress of having Stannis' army approaching, the Manderleys and Freys start going at it. Roose Bolton can't have this going on inside Winterfell, so he tells the Manderleys and Freys that if they want to fight, they're going outside to fight Stannis, and he sends them out. The only thing we hear after this is through a letter to Jon, supposedly from Ramsay Bolton, that says Stannis was defeated. Even though the Night's Watch is supposed to take no part, Jon had found himself rooting for Stannis. After he gets this letter, Jon decides he's going to go to Winterfell, as Stannis requested earlier, but this time he's going to try to take the wildlings with him. This is when he's stabbed, for the Watch. This is the book cliffhanger we've been left with for years. So I expected the show to end much the same way. We'd hear that Stannis was defeated, but not actually see it. Nope, the show had Stannis actually defeated. Not only was he defeated, but he was defeated badly, and he burned his daughter on the way, and he was betrayed by his mercenary army, and his wife committed suicide. Stannis is supposed to be the best military commander in Westeros, and he gets trashed on what appears to be a suicide mission. If he really is dead, I'll just say I hope they take that stag off the intro of the show and replace it with the flayed man. I suppose Gendry can somehow be legitimized as a Baratheon and carry on the family name. I'm just not sure where that storyline would go. Is it possible that Book Stannis will actually lose to the Boltons like happened in the show? Sure, I suppose, but I have a number of reasons to think that won't happen. I am certain that the show strayed heavily from the books here, even though the books are not released. Remember that Stannis left Shireen at the wall in the books, so it's just not possible for him to be killed by the Boltons and burn Shireen. I suppose he could lose to the Boltons and survive the battle, and go back to the wall and burn Shireen. And remember that Book Stannis does not have an army of mercenaries. He has his loyal men, and he has the northern clans and a bunch of other northern fighters with him. So if Stannis goes down, pretty much the whole north goes down with him. There is a theory out there called the Great Northern Conspiracy, which basically says that the North is supporting Stannis to get rid of the Boltons, but once the Boltons are gone, the North will turn on him. I could see how that might be too complicated to add into the show, and man, would that be a tragedy for Stannis. It would just be more confirmation that he never gets the respect that he deserves. So I don't think Stannis is going to burn Shireen, but I do think she's going to burn. I suspect that Melisandre will probably do it without Stannis' permission. I think she'll do this to use Shireen's king blood to resurrect Jon. It's hard for me to think of a scenario where Stannis burns Shireen. Not only are they hundreds of miles apart, but he says often that if he's killed, his men must fight on to sit Shireen on the Iron Throne. I am nearly 100% sure, however, that when Stannis does die, it won't be at the hands of frickin' Brienne. I like that he went out like a boss, saying, "Go on, do your duty." But before that, when she sentenced him to death, she says, "In the name of Renly of House Baratheon, blah 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 blah, the rightful king, blah 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 blah." Come on, Brienne. Renly had about as much claim to the throne as Sir Pounce. I'm not going to go too much into the reasons I think Stannis will defeat the Boltons, but let's just say it involves frozen lakes, faking his own death, and Trojan horse-style infiltration. But if he doesn't burn his daughter, and he doesn't lose the battle, why would the show make such drastic changes? Obviously, I might be completely wrong, and the books might somehow play out like the show. But if I'm right, I can only speculate on the reasons. The main one I would guess is that the show wants Jon to be the big hero. If Stannis defeats the Boltons or kills Ramsay and or Roose, then Jon can't avenge his brother or his raped sister. In the books, Sansa is not raped or even held hostage by Ramsay, but that they made this the case in the show, it makes a lot of sense to set up a Ramsay vs. Jon fight. Also, if Shireen is burned alive to bring back Jon, it might taint our hero a bit. Oh, by the way, I mentioned before the show writing being inconsistent, but geez, they have Davos risk his life to stop Stannis from sacrificing Gendry, who he didn't even know, but when it's obvious Stannis intends to sacrifice Shireen, whom Davos is very close to, he just meekly takes orders and leaves the camp. This was pretty unconvincing. Anyway, so I predict that much of Book Stannis' role will be filled by a resurrected Jon Snow. In Season 5, the show also killed off Barristan Selmy, who is alive and well and doing important things in the books. Is it possible the show Stannis survived? It doesn't actually show Brienne kill him, after all. This has been widely speculated on, and the consensus is that he's dead. Everyone has confirmed it, including the actors. Stephen Delane has even come out, even kind of talking trash about Game of Thrones and saying he wasn't really into it and doesn't know why it's so popular. So this seems to be the final nail in the coffin. Plus, if he is alive, it's hard to see where his story arc would go. He has no army, no family, no way to play the Game of Thrones. What could they possibly do with him? Well, if he is alive, I see a few different ways it could go that would be pretty interesting. One would be that he makes his way back to the wall, broken and defeated, and realizes that he's not God's chosen one, Azor Ahai, like he's been led to believe. However, he does see that Jon Snow is the real Azor Ahai. So what Stannis does is ask Melisandre to burn him alive to use his king's blood to resurrect Jon. That would be a noble and iron death, and he's one of the few characters tough enough to do it. Another fitting ending would be if he became the next and last Lord Commander of the Night's Watch. The position is vacant after all. Even if Jon is resurrected, there's no way he stays on board. Stannis' sins would be absolved when he joins the Watch. I actually have 2 show reasons and 1 book reason to think that this may be in the cards for him. The show reasons are, 1, his conversation with Sam in Season 5, where he tells them to keep reading to figure out how to defeat the White Walkers. I don't see any reason for the scene unless Stannis is destined to fight them. And 2, Littlefinger reminds us in Season 5 that Stannis is the best military commander in Westeros. I don't know why that scene was in there if Stannis' fate was to be tooled by the Boltons. The third and book-only reason is that when Stannis learns that Dragonglass is a weakness of the White Walkers, he orders that his castle, Dragonstone, be mined for it in preparation for the battle. Stannis is the only person besides Jon and Sam who is actively preparing for war with the White Walkers, and there's periodic reminders of it. As for Book Stannis, there's 4 visions that have me convinced he has much further to go in the story. The first is the great victory in the snow. Now, that might have already happened. Defeating the wildlings might have been this great victory. It also could have been a misreading and maybe he'll never get his great victory, but that vision may indicate he has another big battle yet to come. Another vision that makes me think he has quite a bit longer to go is one that he tells Davos about in the books but not the show, and it goes like this. Last night, gazing into the hearth, I saw things in the flames as well. I saw a king, crown on fire on his brows. Burning, Davos. His own crown consumed his flesh and turned him into ash. Do you think I need Melisandre to tell me what that means? Or you? If this vision is correct, Stannis will die by burning. He knows it too. The third vision that has me convinced that his story is not over is a vision that Daenerys has in the House of the Undying. It says, glowing like sunset, a red sword was raised in the hand of a blue-eyed king who cast no shadow. This is almost certainly a vision of Stannis. He has a glowing sword, he's a blue-eyed king, and he casts no shadow because his shadow is a monster. The final vision is a dream that Daenerys has. It says, that night she dreamt that she was Rhaegar, riding into the Trident, but she was mounted on a dragon, not a horse. When she saw the usurpers' rebel host across the river, they were armored all in ice, but she bathed them in dragon fire, and they melted away like dew and turned the Trident into a torrent. Some small part of her knew that she was dreaming, but another part exulted, this is how it was meant to be. The final dream sequence is probably the hardest to tie Stannis to, and may have nothing to do with him, but it fits with the early visions Stannis saw of himself burning to death. Also, Stannis' brother Robert was a usurper who killed Dany's brother. It might be poetic justice if she kills the brother of her brother's slayer, as he plays the role of usurper of her kingdom. So, if Stannis does survive the battle for Winterfell, my prediction is that he'll be burned by Daenerys' dragons. Perhaps after he's taken the Iron Throne. That was my theory before Season 5 anyway. Now I'm not so confident. But for the longest time, I thought that Stannis would doggedly fight his way, finally win the Iron Throne, and then as soon as he did it, Dany would come with her dragons and take him out. So here's the big question. Can the burning of Shireen be justified? Again, this has not happened in the books, and I don't think it will. Or at least, if it does, I think the stakes will be much higher, like stopping the White Walkers from getting through the wall or something like that. To contemplate this dilemma, we should consider the trolley problem, which is a philosophical thought experiment. The trolley problem goes like this. There's a runaway trolley barreling down the railway tracks. Ahead are 5 people on the track that are going to be killed by the trolley, which cannot be stopped. You're watching this happen, but you notice that there's a lever you can pull to get the trolley to switch to another track. On that track, you see there's only one person who's going to be killed. Should you pull the lever? If you don't, 5 people will be killed. If you do, only one person will be killed. Most people's initial inclination is that pulling the lever is the morally correct thing to do. 1 person dies and 5 people live. This is the utilitarian approach, the greatest good for the greatest number. It's simple math. Only it's not so simple. Let's change the scenario a bit. What if changing the track isn't an option, but pushing an innocent bystander in front of the trolley is? You can save the 5 people, but you have to shove some poor schlep in front of the trolley to stop it. Is it still the morally correct thing to do? Most people's initial inclination is to say no. But really, what's the difference? Let's take it a step further. 5 people drink some contaminated water and it causes a different vital organ in each of them to fail. All 5 are in the hospital dying because there's no organ donors available. Just as the doctor is about to send them home to die with their families, a traveler walks into the office for a routine checkup. Would it be morally justifiable for the doctor to kill the healthy traveler in order to use his organs to save the other 5? These are all variations on the same question that makes what seems like a fairly obvious calculation not so obvious. Okay, so let's say that, like most people, you would pull the lever and sacrifice 1 to save 5, but you would not push the 1 to save the 5. What if it was push the 1 to save 500, or 5,000, or 500,000? Surely there's some point where it becomes justifiable to sacrifice the 1 for the many. What if that 1 is your daughter? This is the dilemma that Stannis faced. Does he sacrifice the one thing he truly loves in this world in order to save his entire kingdom? For him, a man obsessed with duty, and possessed of an iron will that would take him through the gates of hell? The answer was yes. The tragedy of it all, aside from the sacrifice of an innocent, is that he was wrong. You can never be 100% certain that whatever you choose will lead to the best outcome. All you can do is consider the probabilities involved. When you've seen your future in the flames, and you know you're the only person who can stop the long night that never ends, and you're the protector of the realm, almost any action can be morally justified as the greatest good for the greatest number. That concludes my analysis of Stannis the Mannis Baratheon. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more Game of Thrones discussion, please like and subscribe and spread this podcast through the realm. Thank you.